So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our Cyber Secure My Business webinar, Secure Your Business Getting Started. In honor of Small Business Month, we'll cover the basic steps you need to secure your business, educate your employees, and protect your customers. Thank you so much today to our webinar sponsor, Trend Micro, for making this webinar possible. To start us off today, I'd like to introduce Bill Malik, VP of Infrastructure Strategies at Trend Micro, for a short presentation on the threats people face, what a small business leader can do to mitigate those threats, and some of the resources that Trend Micro has to help. Bill?
Thank you very much. So yes, my name's Bill Malik. I've been with Trend for 7 years. I've been in IT for 48 years. So I've been around the block. Started out as a developer, worked at IBM for 12 years, worked at Gartner, where I ran the information security service, was CTO of a startup in identity management, worked as an IT auditor and an independent consultant for much of this century. So what I'm going to talk about in the course of the session are three things: current vulnerabilities. The next chart will show also this agenda, the things that you can do about them, bearing in mind that we are small business people. And then a couple of resources that can help. So for the current vulnerabilities on the next chart, I've taken a document that Datamation published recently. They're a fairly widely used industry publication. They've been around for decades. And they said, you know, here are the kinds of problems that people have: cybersecurity issues, information security challenges. And I've just listed them 10. The first is ransomware as a service. What this means is that when a company gets attacked with ransomware, there are actually a number of different people and organizations that combine resources to make that attack possible. There are groups that provide access as a service. They just go around the web and they check to see which companies have which vulnerabilities. And if they find one, they put it on their little list, which they then sell to ransomware as a service brokers. So the ransomware as a service broker has a catalog of which organizations have which vulnerabilities. And then if you want to go on the dark web and decide you want to take out all of the butcher shops in the greater Des Moines area, you'd select those options and hire them, and they will take 30% of whatever ransomware you get. The attack will be launched against those businesses, knowing in advance what vulnerabilities they have. And then the attack will go in, it'll scan your environment internally, it gets in stealthily so you don't know it's there. They'll gather information, sometimes they'll make copies of it, and then the ransomware attack launches and you find you can't access your data. In addition, most ransomware attacks these days are double-barreled. They find you have to pay money to get the key to unlock your data. And also, you have to pay money to get the data that they stole, they copied, back. And so there's two kinds of extortion going on. Now, one thing we've seen, and I've confirmed this with a couple of other information security vendors, is the amount of ransomware activity from non-state actors has actually decreased in the last few months. And the reason seems to be that with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the non-state actors are trying to keep their heads down. They don't want to end up being targeted by, you know, one of the forces in the conflict that wants to, you know, hurt the other. So what we've seen is these folks are keeping themselves quiet. They're still there, but instead of gathering data for a ransomware attack, what they're doing nowadays is just launching crypto miners, which means that your utility bill is going to go up, that your systems always seem busy, that your networks always seem clogged, that your response time seems to suffer, and you can't figure out why. It's because the ransomware gangs are running crypto mining on there. Anyways, that's one of the things you'll face. This list that comes up from Datamation is meant to be inclusive. So the second item, enterprise security tool sprawl, that affects really big companies who've bought dozens of information security products. Most small business owners don't have that problem, which is why I crossed through it. Misfigured security applications. Everybody has that problem. People put stuff in place and then forget to identify which port. So they forget to take out default passwords. Happens with all sorts of stuff. It happens all the time. It just means you need to be diligent, means you need to have somebody help you take a look at this stuff. Sophisticated spear phishing strategies. Spear phishing means that they want to get information about you for a specific purpose. Like they want to find out, who signs the checks. And if they can figure out through spear phishing who signs the checks and then who tells them what checks to sign, then they can craft an email that looks like it comes from, the big boss and send it to the person who signs the checks, who will quickly sign a check and send it off to where it goes. That's business email compromise, is the kind of problem we're talking about there. Increased credential theft. Folks are always trying to find passwords. It happens on your systems at work. It happens in your cloud-based SaaS applications, the applications you rent. It happens on phones. They just found a vulnerability last week that will take advantage of the Bluetooth capability of your phone. Now, the thing about this that's diabolical is when you turn your phone off, you think it's off. Well, it turns out when you turn off the current iPhones, the Bluetooth stuff stays on. So the malware continues to run even when your phone is technically off and you have to power it on to get going. But the fact is, this is going on. Mobile device and OS vulnerabilities left unchecked. Happens all the time. We need to be on top of this. We need to be aware of what kinds of problems people can face. We need to, take some simple direct measures to solve it. Data governance and management, that tends to happen in organizations that are, more bureaucratic, where you can't have all of your people in one room for a heart-to-heart meeting about, whose data is this, where did it come from, whose application is this, why is it using this cloud that we don't want to use, and so on. Distributed growth of insider threats post-COVID. Again, that's going to affect larger enterprises rather than the scale that we're talking about here. Certainly, COVID has made a lot of challenges. Organizations that never thought that they'd run a significant population of their employees remotely are doing so, which increases the complexity of your IT operation. And every edge is a vulnerability or a point of attack. Poorly secured cloud environments. This happens all the time. Think about it. When you start building a cloud app, at that instant, it is perfectly secure. You're the only one who can touch it. But as it goes through the process of being extended, enhanced, when it finally gets out there, something can go wrong. And it's not easy to get it all right. There are over 500 parameters you have to check correctly if you're building your own cloud app. If you look back over the past 4 years, there have been 4, perhaps 5 instances where the cloud vendors made a mistake that made data visible. All the other breaches of cloud security are the result of a misconfiguration on the part of the person using the app. And finally, incomplete post-attack investigations. This, again, is something that's more of a problem for larger organizations that have to do the forensic analysis. Bear in mind that if you are the victim of some kind of cybercrime, the law enforcement is going to want to be able to figure out what happened, which means they're going to take a look at your systems. Most businesses don't have a spare configuration. So you should probably spend a minute planning ahead to say, if we lose this system and we have to give it to law enforcement while they do an investigation, do we have something we can use as a backup? Because the worst thing you want to do is just go back to whatever you had the day before the attack. Yeah, you're back on the air, but you've just republished the system that has the same vulnerability that got you in trouble. So on the next page that I've of the deck, I've annotated what to do about it. Let me go to the page after that so it's visible. What do we want to do? Here are the things you can do on the next slide. Make sure your settings are right and use an expert. You'll probably have somebody that's going to come in and help set up your IT. Ask them if they have some sort of a sanity check. Ask them if they have some way to see if the configurations are consistent. If you're processing credit card data, you got to be PCI compliant. If you're processing health data, you got to be HIPAA compliant. And the vendors that provide the services for you in these domains would be able to verify that in fact what you've got there is straight. So check your settings and rely on somebody else to do it. You don't have to be IT experts to do this. Second thing I'd really hope everybody did is to use two-factor authentication. Single passwords are a pain. I use two-factor for all my stuff, even personally, even social media. What it means is logging on, I have to go through one more step. But what that means is that nobody's going to hijack my Twitter, my LinkedIn, my bank stuff, just like I do at work. You know, like the pilot says in the aircraft, I want you to do back there what you do up here, what we do up here, and that is to buckle your seatbelt. I want you to do out there what I do right here in my home office, which is to use two-factor authentication. And it doesn't really matter which one you use. If it's a SMS message, if it's a text message to your phone, if it's an app like the Microsoft Authenticator, it doesn't matter. Use something, because that's much better than a static password. Patch the systems. You've heard this 1,000 times. Almost all vulnerabilities are known about and have fixes. Yeah, one of the vendors mentioned recently that they'd seen a significant number of 0 days, more this year than they'd seen in any other similar period. But understand that a significant number of 0 days is in the handful, a few dozen, whereas the total number of cyber attacks is in the hundreds of thousands every month. So patch the systems. There actually is a site that DHS runs out of CISA that has a list of known exploited vulnerabilities. And you can go there and find out about that. Our next speaker will talk about that perhaps. So patch the systems, update your antivirus. I work for a vendor that sells anti-malware stuff. I don't care if you use ours. I'm not in sales. Use one. Our CEO has said the competition are the bad guys. You're happy with Norton from Symantec, go with it. F-Secure, that's fantastic. You want to use McAfee, rock on. Just use something and keep it current. Patch your operating system. If you got Windows, you go Windows Update. Yeah, run it every once in a while. Make sure your systems are current. And finally, remember, it's so cool to be in the internet where everybody is this close. But remember, every nut in the world is 300 milliseconds away from your keyboard. So don't let them in. When you get an email that says something like, I found these pictures of you, or you get a message saying, did you hear who died? Or you see an ad that says, the world mourns as so-and-so passes from the scene. It's all crap. I'm sorry. It's all bad stuff. Don't click on those links. If somebody you don't know sends you a message, or somebody you do know sends you a really bizarre message like, guess what I just found, with no other explanation, they might have been hacked and you don't want to be next. And stay clear of unfamiliar websites. There are drive-by attacks. You don't even have to click on it. You just have to have the website up on your page and your toast. And on the next page, a couple of resources. Again, I don't want to burden you with a whole bunch of things to do, but the CISA has a list of current activity, current problems. You can click on that link and find stuff, and we'll get copies of this material to you. There's a group called SANS, stands for System and Network Security. It's an organization that's been around for over 30 years, and they run a daily newsletter. It's not long. It's just comments on some of the big events. If you have somebody in your organization who wants to keep abreast of what's going on, this is a good thing. And last, I do want to make a pitch for our program we have at Trend called Internet Safety for Kids and Families. And that's stuff, it's not copyrighted material. It's not for fee. Volunteers will go to organizations. I've presented at schools from New Jersey to New Hampshire. I live in Connecticut. And it's a 1-hour class, and it just tells people how to be safe, what kinds of things they should and shouldn't do. The material can be aimed at middle schoolers, at high schoolers, or at adult groups for folks that are concerned with those. And we have made the material available to others. And we also have made it available in translation. So, call out to us. We can help. We want to make it better. And I'll turn it back over to our host. Be safe out there.
Thanks, Bill. That was a lot of really good advice. And I think I'm going to remember that phrase, telling us to rock on with our with our antivirus. Now I'd like to introduce Rick Lichtenfels, Cyber Hygiene Section Chief at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, better known as CISA. He will share some of the great resources that CISA has available. Rick?
Super. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Bill. Some of the things that Bill touched on, I will definitely touch on or amplify a little bit in my talk. But just starting off, a little background. Also, I am currently the section chief for CISA's Cyber Hygiene Services, which I will talk about towards the end of it, and how folks that are on this call can gain access to these free, I always like to stress that word, free resources. CISA puts a lot of time into pushing out a lot of services that we think will help the community. And we try to get them out to as many people as possible. But currently I'm in that role. I have been with CISA for 17 years, add in some industry experience as a consultant, and I'm past 25 years playing in this space. I've spent time at CISA in the ICS cert, for those of you that are familiar with that, and again, and the NCIC. But I've been serving in this current role for the last 4.5 years. Getting past that, I do want to thank you for having me on this panel. I can tell you CISA places a high emphasis on small businesses. We're chartered with protecting the nation's infrastructure. I know there's a tendency, I think, for a lot of folks, when you think of national infrastructure or critical infrastructure, they tend to mentally maybe gravitate towards big businesses. But we recognize that small business play a huge role in the economy and the vitality of the nation. And very recently, as in within the last 2 weeks, as a part of Small Business Week, we stood up a website, launched some guidance. We could probably go to the next slide, actually, because that touches on the very first bullet, which was we pushed out on our website some very specific guidance for small and mid-sized businesses. Host of information there, lots of actionable information, resources. On the page, we specify a few key things that we want folks to really focus on: practicing good cyber hygiene, training your staff, understanding how to prepare and respond to if, God forbid, an incident does occur. And let's be truthful, incidents are going to occur. We see them time and time again. Possibly many of you that are sitting on this call have experienced some less than pleasant experiences. So we help folks try to understand, once it happens, how do you respond to it? And then, again, a lot of different information, and I'll touch on a little bit more of that. In terms of my artistic capabilities, you'll notice that the first bullet has a little bit more blue. That's because we were focused on small business, so I really wanted to draw attention to that. That second bullet that speaks to our ransomware websites, Bill talked a little bit about ransomware and things that you could do to hopefully not become a victim of ransomware. Recognizing the importance and just the prevalence and the threat that ransomware poses to the entire nation. Last year, CISA stood up the Stop Ransomware website, and what we tried to do was really focus out of the myriad of information that we push out to folks, things that are very specific to ransomware. And if you go to that website, you'll see right on the front page one of the things that Bill mentioned, which is Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. So that's front and center, lets folks know these are things that not only, they're not only vulnerabilities that everyone knows exist, but these are things that we are seeing exploited. So you want to pay, let's say you want to be hyper vigilant maybe in those areas. But again, ransomware attacks, they're not going anywhere. In fact, they've surged among small businesses. We pushed out an alert earlier this year in February. We worked with our partners at the FBI, and it talked about the growth of ransomware within small and mid-sized businesses. And aside from obviously stressing some of the things we're seeing, again, we try to not just give people a headache, we try to give them a pill. So we try to give them access to some best practices or things that they can do to, hopefully combat these things that we're seeing. I know that alert specifically mentioned keeping your software and OSs updated, a couple of things that Bill touched on, implementing user training, doing phishing exercises, phishing campaign awareness or phishing campaign assessments, is something that I'm going to talk about when I get to the cyber hygiene services. But that, again, that does continue to be arguably the most prevalent vector for folks getting into systems. And then Alert also really pushes for folks to have offline data backups and use of multi-factor authentication. Lots of good stuff there. One thing that I was pleased that we did on that website too is we jazzed it up a little bit. It's not on the main page, but we have some informational videos. So if you feel like you're tired of kind of reading alerts and long-winded advisories, I get it. I don't have the attention span I used to have either. So we put in some videos to try and make it a little bit, I don't know, a little bit more attractive for folks to visit. So please, I encourage folks to hit both of those first two links. And then on the last link, getting to the cyber hygiene services, we can probably jump to the next one. That's actually in my wheelhouse. And good for everyone to know, this is the last slide that I have too, so you won't hear me talk too long. The services that I have listed there, vulnerability scanning, web application scanning, phishing campaign assessments, those are three of the most highly publicized or pushed, so to speak, services that CISA offers. So if you bounce around those other web pages that I mentioned, you will see mention of these. All three of these services are free. And really what we try to do in rolling these services out is help folks understand that, you know, a lot of times when people think about someone breaking into their systems or doing something nefarious, and I actually saw a comic about that. It's not some super stealthy genius, you know, bad actor sitting out somewhere or part of this, you know, nation state team. A lot of times it's just very simple things that were not adhered to that made you vulnerable. It's almost like, you know, you're leaving the doors of your house unlocked. Well, it doesn't take somebody that's really smart to go up and turn the knob and come in your house. You know, they're not picking your lock. They're not doing anything really sophisticated if you make it so easy for them to break into your house. And just by practicing simple cyber hygiene, a lot of the things that Bill talked about, keeping your systems patched, using certain multi-factor authentication, just very basic stuff. And it's a list that I won't go through. You can get yourself 90% of the way there in terms of protecting your system. So what these services do, the first one, vulnerability scanning, we execute continuous scans of static IP space. So very easy to get into any of these services. You basically send an email to, my apologies for not putting it on this page because I put the other links, vulnerability@cisa.dhs.gov. If you send an email to that email, you'll get a response with a service request form, and you can specify the specific service you want. They'll respond, they'll give you an acceptance letter, an Appendix A, talks about what you would like scanned, and then we can typically get you signed up within a week. With the vulnerability scanning, for those of you that are familiar with Tenable or Qualys or a host of other vulnerability scanners, we scan your static IP space. We identify any vulnerabilities that you have. If we see critical or high vulnerabilities while we're scanning you, you'll get an alert notification the next day at the email address that you provide. So you'll know the next day, oh my goodness, this is bad. This is what we found last night. Hopefully that won't happen, but if that does happen and you receive the alert, you'll also see in the weekly report that we send out to you, a complete catalog of everything that we found, whether it's a low, medium, high, or critical vulnerability. So that's on the vulnerability scanning service. Right now, we have over 3,800 folks that are enrolled in this service. So it's been pretty successful. We've been doing it for about 9 years. We continue to evolve the service. We're constantly working with national labs, working with vendors, surveying the marketplace to We're doing OPM surveys. We're doing voice of the customers and webinars. I eagerly await any and all feedback. I think Bill mentioned, a lot of times you may stand up a cloud environment or a certain environment initially, and it looks great, but as time goes on, maybe it's not so great or it becomes more vulnerable. Well, I don't like to stand pat with our services, so we've made some enhancements, and we're constantly putting new features into these services. So we have the vuln scanning. We also have web application scanning. So that's going to tackle publicly accessible websites, bugs, weak configurations, buffer overflows, variety of things that we could find on the web application security front. And same thing, you fill out the forms, we get you signed up, we scan you, and we let you know what we're finding. You're probably not going to fix that stuff as quickly as you can the vuln scanning, but that's okay. And then phishing campaign assessments, that's the third service that I'm pushing. And that also touches on the thing Bill was talking about with spear phishing or sophisticated emails that you might get. Our phishing campaign assessments run the gamut. So it's everything from, oh my goodness, I'm trapped overseas. Please send me money so I can get home. Things that we all know we should not click. Some people still do click. I guess curiosity really just gets the best of them. Up to things that are very sophisticated that look like a legitimate email coming from your boss directing you to do something or wanting you to access this link to look at information that they may or you think they're sending you. But these are ongoing campaigns. So once you enroll in the phishing campaign assessments, we can set up campaigns that spearfit or phish every user in your organization. You could also limit it if you want, if you don't want to do every user in your organization, and it's continual. And it's not designed to test your security controls. It's really designed to help you understand the susceptibility of your personnel to clicking on stuff and how your personnel may respond once they click on something. Do they run and hide? Do they let your security folks know? So it's really meant to help your team understand what they did and then using it as training opportunities so they don't do it in the future. Last service there that's grayed out, posture and exposure. That right now is something we are piloting across the federal government. So we typically like to work with some of our federal partners or in-house brothers to work out the kinks before we roll out stuff to the masses. That will be coming soon. I kind of refer to this as the things that make you go, service. For those of you that are older like me and remember that song, it really is a combination of things that don't cleanly fit into any of the other services. So are you showing up on certain sites as being vulnerable? Is information on the dark web, possibly leaked credentials, that's being exposed? Just a variety of other sorts of information that any CISO or CIO would really be concerned about and want to pay attention to in terms of buttoning down your cybersecurity posture. So that was a lot. I think that about wraps up what I was going to say. Again, if you remember nothing else about this, vulnerability at CISA.dhs.gov. Second thing, some of those links from the first slide. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Rick. That was a lot of really great information. We're going to pivot now and have a little panel discussion. So feel free to put your questions in the chat. We have a couple of questions already lined up, but feel free to chime in. Bill, can you talk to us a little bit about trends that business owners should be aware of? Any new types of attacks or trends that you're seeing as far as what's affecting small businesses?
Well, as I mentioned before, we do see ransomware all over the place. It has backed off a little bit by some measures, but it's still out there very much in the wild. And it affects an awful lot of organizations regularly. Now, sometime you can get by without paying the ransom if you've got good backups We do not recommend paying the ransom. It just gives them money to make more attacks. And these are serious businesses. The Conti group itself, which is a ransomware group, was hacked. And we got some of their internal emails. And one of them was really kind of, you raise your head and go, huh? It's the Conti's head of HR complaining about how hard it is to find qualified candidates to work in their ransomware as a service business. They're making tons of money. If you get hit, I mean, don't pay the ransom. Certainly don't pay the ransom without talking to, the authorities, having some kind of an attorney. There are people that specialize in negotiations. There was one case where the hackers, they were rookies. They asked for $100 million, kind of like the bad guy in an Austin Powers movie, right? People said that's ridiculous, and they got in a negotiator who explained that they didn't have anywhere near that much money. And then the guy said, what about $10,000? And this was a small school district. And so they eventually set on $2,000. Now, again, negotiating with these guys is not the right thing to do. And a side note on that, you don't want your first meeting with the FBI to be while they're in the middle of an investigation. So you want to get to know whichever agencies you're going to need to work with. You want to get to know ahead of time. Fortunately, there's an organization called InfraGard. It's national. It's the FBI combined with the state police. They have offices in most of the major cities, and you can sit down and you can, have a cup of coffee on, I think there are Tuesday evenings, at least up in Hartford, near where I am. And you can talk about stuff, and you can talk about what's really going on. And, you'll get to know these people before you need them. And that can be incredibly helpful. You can talk about what you're seeing. They'll listen. They give information back. Years ago, the book on police agencies generally was they take a lot of data, but they don't give you anything back. Well, that's dramatically changed. So yeah, the biggest trends are people are still trying to get stuff. Business email compromise is growing. Ransomware is happening all the time. Malware is out there. It's no longer joyriders. It's no longer kids trying to show off for their peers. It's very much business. They want to make money. And most importantly, don't take it personally. This happens to everybody all the time. The Starwood breach, the Equifax breach, the OPM breach, these brought together information on about 2/3 of all the adults in the United States. So you get huge bodies of data that are being used by these. Now, if you're targeted by a nation state actor, they're probably going to get what they want. But the kinds of stuff that's going down is pretty intricate. So, keep your thinking cap on. I had one situation, I heard about this just 2 years ago, where the executive assistant to the divisional vice president of one of the biggest banks in New York got an email from his friend Joe. Joe was the executive assistant to the president of a large manufacturing firm in New Jersey. And Joe wrote to Fred and said, hey, Fred, how's things going? By the way, congratulations on your son in last Thursday's basketball game. He really did well. You should be really proud of him. Say, look, it's the end of the quarter. We've got this invoice. It's hanging out. It's $3.5 million. If it rolls past the end of the quarter, I'm going to have to do a lot of investigation. Could you just have your AP people, cut us the check for this? Routing information is below. And so Fred looked at it, thought, oh, geez, we got a problem with Joe. And so he forwarded immediately to his accounts payable team and said, please handle this, get back to me. And they got back to him about 20 minutes later and said, say, Fred, the account number's bad. I mean, there's no account at the other end. We tried to run the transfer. And so Fred picked up the phone and called Joe and said, hey, Joe, that email you sent had a bad account number. And Joe said, what email? The bad guys had used the Facebook profile and the LinkedIn profile to find an individual who was the executive assistant to a bank who had a relationship with an individual who was an executive assistant at a large company who was a customer of the bank. The whole thing was a complicated business email compromise. And if they hadn't mistyped the number in the routing code, that money would have been gone. And it was below the clip level that would not have showed up and set off any red flags, given the fact that it had been authorized by this very senior person. You're not going to be asked to transfer $3.5 million, but you may be asked to transfer 20,000. Whenever you see something like that, encourage your coworkers, encourage your employees, talk to each other. You know, don't just do stuff reflexively. Yeah, sometimes I can really be demanding, but I really want you to talk with each other. I want you to look around. I want you to think about this stuff. And you can flatten this. You can slow it down.
Thanks, Bill. We had somebody else on a related note who asked, what's the profile of the small businesses that are most susceptible to attack? And I think we'd all say all of them.
Well, yeah, to narrow it down, you have to be a small business and you have to be online.
Pretty much all of them. Yeah. Yeah, it's something you shouldn't take for granted these days, I guess. Don't think that you're not targeted because you're too small, nobody knows who you are, things like that. They're watching social media, as Bill said, and don't take it for granted.
Just on that, we run honeypots globally, and we published research on one that was running for a few months back in 2020. We put together a site. It looks like a small manufacturing firm. It's got, you know, all the stuff you'd expect. It's got email, and it's got profiles on LinkedIn of the principals, and it's got real equipment, and there's real gear there. And when we stand these things up, it typically is 15 minutes from when we get the website live that we start getting attacked. We simulated a small water company in the Midwest. It went live, it got hit within 15 minutes. And it's not because there are people looking out for you. It's because these things are being scanned constantly. There's an enormous amount of, you know, oh, who just showed up? New DNS record shows up. Let's go see if they're smart. Let's go see what they've done. Oh, they just installed Office 365. I wonder if they turned off friends and family yet. Let's do a password spraying attack and see. It's just an enormous amount of continuous scanning. The bad guys are always checking to see if the key's under the mat, if the door's unlocked, if the keys are in the ignition. You just got to be aware that that's happening all the time.
Thanks, Bill. Rick, we've all pivoted to working from home over the past couple of years. Even small businesses still have maybe an employee or two working from home, or maybe all of them. So can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of problems that presents? How do you secure your network when your perimeter is in people's houses? Any tips for working from home security?
A few things, and you know, going back to what I mentioned earlier about the Cyber Essentials and CISA's focus on really trying to help small businesses, that Cyber Essentials starter kit, I think, really does help people work through some of these issues like that and get you to a pretty solid place. So whether you're working from home, you're working in an office, you know, obviously strong password requirements, stuff like that, keeping your software up to date. For folks that are more distributed like that, you know, consider using a managed service provider or cloud service provider. A lot of times these are organizations, I'm not saying they're flawless, but they have the resources and a huge investment in security services. So if you're a smaller business that doesn't have the means to stand up these things yourself or handle these things yourself, leaning on more established, well-resourced providers can help with that. You know, Google, Microsoft, they also have certain security services that they can do. So those would be a few things that I would throw out there. Some of the other things, phishing, again, you know, phishing is always going to be a problem. So I do think some of the resources that I've mentioned are beneficial. They're not the single bullet. There is no single bullet, but they help and they're free. So whether you're distributed or working in an office environment, co-located, these services are applicable. Now, if you do take advantage of the vuln scanning service that I had mentioned, you definitely want to check if you are using a provider. You definitely want to check with them if you have an upstream provider to make sure that they're okay with getting scanned. And you need to have static IPs, stuff that's dedicated to you, whether it's for a web server or something that you have stood up yourself. But so those would be a few things. But that I take it back to that Cyber Essentials starter kit. Will get you. It'll get you pretty far down the road.
Rick, we had 2 more questions along those lines come in directly for you. First of all, what is the wait time to start the vulnerability scanning from CISA? Are you backed up right now?
So we're doing pretty well. We saw a huge influx of requests during the first and second quarter. But right now, if you get signed up for the vuln scanning, it's about a week. Could be a little bit less, so let's just say a week, give or take a day. We can get you signed up pretty quick with that. Same thing with the web app scanning. The phishing takes a little bit longer, just because it's a relatively new service, and it takes a little bit longer to work with you and send some of the test emails to make sure we're not getting blocked by the email provider. So.
And then a follow on to that, does CISA offer assistance in vulnerability remediation?
So we do, if you've had an incident, you can report that in. We do have incident response teams. It really depends on the nature of the incident. Obviously, we try and push out guidance for folks to help themselves as much as possible. But we do have incident response teams that, depending on the nature of the incident, who's affected, we can and will and have and do deploy teams that will go out with some larger incidents. We've had teams that have worked with organizations for months to help them eradicate the problems that they have.
Good to know. Bill, we had a question come in that I'd like to send your way. We've talked about ransomware. We haven't talked in any great detail about the practice of having a really good data backup plan. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, ransomware will encrypt your data so you can't use it. So the way to thwart a ransomware attack is to keep a copy of your data someplace where you can get to it if an attack happens. Now, just taking a backup by itself isn't actually enough, because the bad guys who pull off this kind of stuff will take a look at your system and see what processes are running, and they'll see that you take backups, and they will, if they can, go to your backups and encrypt them too. So what you need to do is you need to take backups, then you need to take a copy and disconnect it from your system. And then you need to make sure that it's readable and you can restore from it. It's an additional piece of work. It can be scripted. It's not something you have to manually do. But you need to do a little more than just take a backup and say, I'm okay. The backup, when I worked on IBM Poughkeepsie, we'd say the backup always works. The restore can be problematic. You got to make sure you got the whole process in place, and a reputable, provider will help you set that up and check it and verify that it's good and secure and protected from ransomware.
Thanks for that. I'm just taking a look at some more of the questions coming in. Rick, is there any limit to how often you'll do the vulnerability scanning for a particular organization?
It's continuous. So when you sign up, you will get scanned until you tell us you don't want to be scanned any further. And the way it works is once you get signed up, we do an initial port scan. I think we only hit 1,000 ports. I think it is. I'd have to verify that with my tech lead on that. But we do a port scan to see what ports are open. And we identify live hosts. Once we identify your live host, we start scanning you. And if we find nothing, you're only going to get scanned about once a week. If we find a critical vulnerability, we're going to rescan you in 12 hours. If it's a high vulnerability, we're going to rescan you in 24 hours. If it's a medium, it's going to be 2 days, so forth. So but it is in perpetuity. It doesn't end until you tell us you want to opt out, or if you need to pause your scan for some reason, like you're doing testing or you're deploying something and you prefer we weren't. Election season is a prime example. Most election officials do not want us scanning them like crazy during, high times of election. So.
Somebody else asked a question. It's probably more appropriate for federal law enforcement, but if either one of you want to chime in on this one. Somebody recently saw an article about somebody who lost a lot of money in a scam and was told that it wasn't, the size of the loss wasn't big enough for it to be investigated. I know that that one of the issues that we're constantly talking about is encouraging people to report. And without all that reporting, it's really hard for law enforcement to have a high level view of just how much damage is being done by any particular organization. I mean, they clearly are under resourced when it comes to the scope of this problem. And so they're going to put their investigative muscle behind the biggest problems, right? And that's why it's so important for people to report, because you're not just reporting about what happened to you. You're ending up in a database with everybody else who's reporting about what happened to them, and law enforcement is trying to connect the dots there. Any comment about how big an issue has to be before you should report, or before you should expect law enforcement to get involved in any way? Either one of you want to comment on that? That's a toughie.
Well,
I would not know what the threshold is, so I'll defer to Bill on that. He may have more insight because I don't really have anything for that one.
I've heard that there were thresholds, but I think 160K goes way above it. So I think there is a threshold, but I think it's lower. Yeah. But on the other hand, one of the interesting things about crypto is people use it as a way to stay away from governmental interference. And so law enforcement agencies, they want to spend their time when they can, arrest a criminal, leads to a prosecution, ultimately a conviction. So the first thing they're going to do is, how likely is it that this individual is actually going to end up testifying in open court to what happened? And based on that initial judgment, they will then decide how much time to spend on the case. I had a former police officer working for me when I ran the security service at Gartner. And this was his long experience. So yeah, get to know them ahead of time. If you do suffer a significant loss, bear in mind, you bring law enforcement in, they're not just going to, point out the bad guy and then leave it up to you. Their only goal is to bring the person to justice and let the law and order process proceed. So there may be some other side to the story. I mean, they may say it's not up above our clip level, but anything other above 100 grand, I think would probably qualify.
Thank you for that. Rick, we have a question here. What's the actual impact of your scanning? In other words, is it slowing down a system, or is there any effect on the end user?
No, it's honestly no different. As I like to tell people, we're not doing anything that bad guys aren't already doing or bad people aren't already doing. We're just nice enough to give you a report and tell you it's like what we found, and they're not going to give you that. So no complaints really that we've had from any of our folks over excessive traffic or anything slowing down their systems, nothing of that sort. I did notice too, there was a comment about the vulnerability, info_vulnerability. I will have to speak to our website folks to get that corrected, because you don't need the info_ piece to it. It's just vulnerability at CISA.dhs.gov.
Good. Bill, the resources that Trend Micro has for families and kids are really impressive. It's a nice body of work that Trend Micro has put together. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and what can people on this call take away for their families?
Well, like I said, it's about a 1 hour presentation, and it's designed to be understood by, middle school people. So it's not full of acronyms and a lot of technical stuff. The theme is to stay safe online, how to avoid the kinds of problems that everyday citizens have. I work from home almost all of the time. I haven't been in our office in Jersey City in probably 2.5 years. And so a lot of the stuff we teach in that class is stuff that I use here, which is stuff that, I mentioned in the presentation. It gives you insight into, what is cyberbullying? What kinds of things should you not share online? We have one famous picture from a gal who was an undergraduate at Ohio State, and she was so happy that she got her first credit card and her driver's license on the same day that she took a selfie holding her credit card and her driver's license and posted it on Facebook. Now, that is what we in the high-tech world of information security call a bad idea, right? You don't want to put that kind of stuff online. First of all, it's forever. And even if you only shared it with friends, that doesn't mean that somebody's not going to be able to take a capture of the image and send it around. So yeah, be really prudent about it. I don't share pictures when I travel until after I've come home, because I live alone. So, and that's the kind of stuff we put in there. Hints and tips on how to be a good cyber citizen and what to look out for, and what to, what kinds of things consist of best practices. And a lot of it is getting the conversation going between the parents or the caregivers and the kids. How do you tell your kids not to spend so much time on social media if you're on social media at breakfast? It's a very interesting problem. You really do need to figure out, how you model good behavior, what kinds of things you consider acceptable, and how you do that. And there are little exercises, little games you can play as part of the session. We've given the material. I was speaking at a large bank in South America, and the guy says, most of our employees work from home. We got 10,000 employees. And so we had a Spanish version of the material, and then we had Teach the Teachers. So the bank could use that stuff, and it's not logoed, so they could put their own logo on, to teach their own employees, families, about how to do that stuff. Because yeah, I live alone, but my daughter and her husband are playing games, and she's got a full-time job working from home at a call center. And they also do a lot of time with games. And so they got all sorts of IT, a complex home network. So you got to worry about, does this data bleed into that? And those are the kinds of things that we ask people to think about. How many devices are in your home? What does your home network really look like? Who connects to your small business? There was a question about a very small business that uses commercial internet service. I think if you dial in to a regular internet like a home user would, that you don't have a stable fixed IP address, which means that vulnerability scanning really won't work over the long term. Can you confirm that, Rick?
That is correct. That's what I was going to say. You nailed it, Bill.
So to Bill's point about the materials they have available, not being trademarked, there's lots of information out there available for free to train your employees and to use with your family or your local school or place of worship or what have you. We have a lot of information on StaySafeOnline.org, and then there's information on CISA.gov. There's the program, the content that Bill mentioned. So don't feel like you're alone in this. Don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. Don't feel like you have to purchase anything for your business. There's lots and lots of free material out there. We're about out of time for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. The recording of the session will be available online. As I said, you can find us at StaySafeOnline.org. Thank you, both of our speakers today, for sharing all this information and helping us keep our businesses secure. Stay in touch with us on social media. And if you need anything, email us at info@StaySafeOnline.org. Thank you.